NFL Week 9. Biggest questions, takeaways for every game. Week 9 of the NFL season kicked off Thursday with the New York Jets defeating the Houston Texans. On Sunday, the Baltimore Ravens blew out the Denver Broncos, and Buffalo Bills won a thriller over the Miami Dolphins. Our NFL Nation reporters reacted to all the action, answering lingering questions coming out of each game and detailing everything else you need to know for every team. Let's get to it. Can the Titans' #1 defense finish the season that way? No. The Titans' defense was first in the NFL, allowing 265.4 total offensive yards per game coming into the week. They gave up 284 to the Patriots, tying a season high with 4 sacks. They did manage to generate 2 takeaways, but giving up an 11-play drive covering 59 yards for a touchdown is something a top unit should be able to avoid. They did redeem themselves with an interception by Amani Hooker in overtime to seal the win. Most surprising performance, the Titans' defensive front was a menace to the Patriots. Defensive coordinator Dennard Wilson attacked New England with blitzes from the linebackers and safeties, along with some well-executed stunts and twists up front throughout the game. Jeffrey Simmons got one of Tennessee's sacks, and his pressure on rookie quarterback Drake May forced a rush throw that was intercepted. Arden Key's strip sack set up the go-ahead score in the fourth quarter. Describe the game in 2 words: fourth quarter. The Titans averaged 1.7 points in the fourth quarter, which ranks last in the NFL. But Tennessee found its way to the end zone against the Patriots, resulting in its first fourth-quarter touchdown since Week 4 against the Dolphins. The Patriots answered, but the Titans' field goal in overtime was the difference in the final score. How does rookie QB Drake May respond heading into next week's game against Caleb Williams and the Bears? May did some magical things to send the game to overtime, but 2 costly mistakes, a strip sack and an interception in overtime, provided the ultimate learning experience for the #3 pick as he faces the #1 pick next week. This was May's 4th start, and he hadn't been in that type of situation before. He answered the challenge at the end of regulation, scrambling to keep a sensational final play alive before lofting a pass to Ramondre Stevenson for a 5-yard touchdown. But his game-ending interception late in overtime, which hung up in the air, was underwhelming. Eye-popping stat, the time to throw on May's game-tying touchdown pass was 11.82 seconds. That's the second longest time to throw on any touchdown pass since NFL Next Gen Stats tracking began in 2016, regular season or playoffs. Jaden Daniels' Hail Mary touchdown last week leads at 12.70 seconds. Those are the only touchdown passes since tracking began with a time to throw of 10 seconds or longer. Biggest hole in the game plan: no traditional running game. Stevenson was limited to 16 yards on 10 carries, and the Patriots' best rushing attack was May on unscripted scrambles. The coaching staff started rookie Layden Robinson at right guard after he missed Week 8 with an ankle injury, which bumped Mike Onwenu out to right tackle. The latter was a decision to second guess as Robinson was pulled late in the second quarter. Can the Bills find an answer for the slow starts this season? They better hope they can. After putting together a solid start to the game last week with an opening touchdown drive against the Seahawks, the Bills' trend of starting slowly came back against Miami. Buffalo trailed at halftime for the 5th time this season, and Keon Coleman and James Cook had bad drops in the first half. Then, in the second half, the Bills went on 3 straight touchdown drives. Some bad penalties didn't help, but finding an offensive rhythm earlier is something that must be corrected to avoid these late-game situations in the future. Biggest hole in the game plan: finding ways to pressure the quarterback. This defense's ability to generate pressure is something to continue to monitor. Tua Tagovailoa was pressured onto 17.2% of dropbacks and sacked once, and the Bills' defense registered 2 quarterback hits. They elected not to blitz often, 10.3%, which allowed the Dolphins to put together long drives, 5 of 9 or more plays. Early prediction for next week: continued role expansion for running back Ray Davis. Why not? Davis has continued to prove he can be a dynamic part of this offense alongside Cook. Davis's 63-yard receiving touchdown was the longest reception by a Bills running back since 2012 C.J. Spiller, and he also averaged 5.0 yards on his 4 carries. What are realistic expectations for Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill moving forward? The NFL's leading receiving duo over the past 2 seasons combined for just 2 targets in the first half Sunday, both of which went to Hill. Both players are on pace to finish with fewer than 1,000 receiving yards for the first time as teammates, And Miami isn't forcing the issue with opposing defenses selling out to stop its home run hitting receivers. The Dolphins' remaining schedule features 6 teams ranked 16th or better against the pass. Until they face more favorable coverages, it might be safe to assume both players will continue on this path. Describe the game in 2 words: balanced attack. While the Bills focus on taking away Hill and Waddle, the Dolphins turn to their other playmakers to move the ball. 9 different players touched the ball. 3 players received at least 5 targets, and 2 players recorded at least 10 carries. Biggest hole in the game plan: defending the flats. The Bills lived on their short passing game, particularly to the right flat area of the field. Josh Allen completed 9 of 13 passes for 120 yards and a touchdown on outbreaking routes. He completed 20 of 32 passes for 175 yards and 3 touchdowns on passes of 5.0 air yards or fewer, according to ESPN research. Is quarterback Jaden Daniels a legitimate MVP candidate? He should be, considering his importance to Washington's offense. They're 7-2 in large part because of him. On Sunday, Daniels was not spectacular, but he made big-time throws and managed the game at a high level. Daniels completed 15 of 22 passes for 209 yards and 2 touchdowns. While others merit strong consideration, Buffalo's Josh Allen and Baltimore's Lamar Jackson among them, Daniels warrants inclusion. He has 9 touchdown passes, only 2 picks, and 4 rushing scores as well. As tight end Zach Ertz said recently, he does not play like a rookie. Describe the game in 2 words: not pretty. Though the Commanders' offense scored 27 points, the Giants dominated time of possession and kept it close with 2 fourth-quarter touchdowns. Of the Giants' 13 touchdowns this season, 6 have come against Washington. More importantly, the Commanders have swept the series after being 3-8-1 versus the Giants over the previous 6 years. Biggest hole in the game plan: the first half run defense. New York ran for 140 yards in the first half, gashing Washington up the middle. The Commanders fared much better after halftime, allowing 24 yards on the ground, partly because of the tackle play, but also because they pulled ahead. Teams will continue to test their rush defense. What does this loss mean for Daniel Jones' future? The Giants have to at least be thinking about their quarterback position if they're not willing to throw the ball. That was the case in the first half when Jones was completely ineffective. They can turn to backup Drew Lock next week against the league's worst defense in Carolina. Or they can use the next 2 weeks, which includes a bye, to adjust their offense. At this point, it seems inevitable if Coach Brian Daboll doesn't have full confidence in his quarterback. Jones was better in the second half, going 16 of 20 for 174 yards. He had passing and rushing touchdowns in the second half. Eye-popping stat: Jones had 0 passing yards in the first half. That's not a misprint. He was 4 of 6 passing for 0 yards, but also with a touchdown. It was his first home touchdown pass in 672 days, dating back to 2022 Week 17. According to ESPN research, Jones became the first player since at least 1978 to have a passing touchdown and 0 passing yards in a half, minimum 5 pass attempts. It's hard to win that way in today's NFL. Biggest hole in the game plan: the Giants' pass rush was missing in action, especially in the first half. Daniels was pressured on 2 of 13 dropbacks, 15%, in the first half per ESPN research. The Giants entered Sunday pressuring opposing quarterbacks at a 35% clip. It's generally the strength of the team. They didn't have a sack in this contest. Should the Chargers be concerned about their pass protection? The Browns sacked Justin Herbert 6 times Sunday, all of which came in the first half. It was the most Herbert had been sacked in a game in his career, and the 6th straight game in which he was sacked multiple times. The Chargers' offensive line was supposed to be this team's strong suit, but it looked mediocre Sunday. The Browns' edge rushers dominated All-Pro tackle Rashawn Slater and first-round pick Joe Alt, as well as the interior offensive line. Most surprising performance: wide receiver Quentin Johnston. He had the best game of his career Sunday, finishing with 4 catches for 118 receiving yards. Johnston's top play came on a 66-yard receiving touchdown in the second quarter when he sprinted by Pro Bowl cornerback Denzel Ward for his 4th touchdown of the year. Describe the game in 2 words: defensive dominance. After scoring a season-high 29 points in a win over the Baltimore Ravens in quarterback Jameis Winston's first start, the Chargers held the Browns to a season low of 10 points. Cleveland's lone touchdown came with 44 seconds left in the game, and most of LA's defensive starters out. The Chargers secured 3 interceptions, sacked Winston 6 times, and blocked a field goal. Should the Browns be willing to trade at the deadline? Only one team in the Super Bowl era has started 2-7 and made the playoffs. Cleveland's resurgence with Jameis Winston at quarterback was short-lived, and Tuesday's trade deadline is looming. The Browns have multiple veteran players on inexpensive contracts, most notably pass rushers Darius Smith. He could net the draft picks the front office needs to retool after a disappointing first half of the season. Describe the game in 2 words: offensive regression. 1 week after Winston helped engineer a season-best performance, the Browns often struggled against a top defense in the NFL. Cleveland had just 57 total net yards at halftime. Winston has now thrown 102 interceptions, the most by any player in his first 100 career games since Matthew Stafford in 2016, according to ESPN research. Most surprising performance. According to NFL Next Gen stats, cornerback Denzel Ward allowed 2 receptions for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns on 5 targets as the nearest defender. He had entered the day with 1 touchdown allowed as the nearest defender this season. Both scores came in zone coverage on apparent coverage bust. Does Bryce Young get a 3rd straight start? Heck yeah. As many times as Coach Dave Canales has said Andy Dalton gives Carolina the best chance to win, Young engineered his first game-winning touchdown drive. He showed glimpses of why he was drafted number 1. He 100% deserves to start in Germany. He threw with confidence, 16 of 26 for 171 yards. His pick should have been a big catch by Xavier Legette. Were it not for conservative play calling, the numbers would be better. Most surprising performance, red zone defense. Carolina allowed red zone touchdowns 71.4% of the time coming into the day. That was trimmed to 50%, which isn't great, but is a huge improvement from the 94% in the first 5 games of the year. Forcing 2 red zone field goals early kept this one close enough to win. Eye-popping stat. Jatavian Sanders generated the most receiving yards over expected in a game by a rookie tight end this season, plus 50. His 87 receiving yards was more than leading wide receivers Jalen Coker and Legette had combined, 69. Do the Saints move on from Dennis Allen? The Saints have now lost 7 straight, their longest losing streak since 1999, which resulted in coach Mike Ditka getting fired at the end of the year. With a disgruntled fan base and little hope of the playoffs at this point, the Saints probably will have to consider major changes. They also could be without top receiver Chris Olave for an extended period of time, as he sustained his 2nd concussion of the season in the first quarter and was taken to a local hospital. Most surprising performance, CB Shamar Jean-Charles. The 26-year-old made his first career start after being signed to the active roster Saturday. Although he gave up an early touchdown and a big play late, he had an impressive interception in the 4th quarter, knocking the ball out of Xavier Legette's hands and into his own for his first career pick. Describe the game in 2 words: melting down. The defense gave up a late touchdown. The offense couldn't score consistently, and the injury list grew longer. The Saints haven't shown any signs of improvement during their 7-game losing streak and have made mistakes on both sides of the ball. They've had penalties at key times, questionable play calls, and time management issues. What does this Bengals win mean in the big picture? Not a ton. The Bengals did what they needed to do to avoid falling to 3-6 on the season. But Sunday's win still doesn't give Cincinnati a win over a team with a winning record. The Raiders suffered several injuries and eventually went to backup quarterback Desmond Ridder. A win is a win, sure. But matchups against the Ravens, Chargers, and Steelers in the next 3 weeks will be better litmus tests of where the Bengals stand. Describe the game in 2 words: palate cleanser. A relatively dominant victory erased the taste of a deflating Week 8 loss to the Eagles. Cincinnati needed a strong performance against a bad team to start building in-season momentum, especially with the showdown against the Ravens looming on a short week. Eye-popping stat, quarterback Joe Burrow scrambled for a total of 66.6 yards on his 5 touchdown passes, according to NFL Next Gen stats. 2 of those touchdowns featured scrambles of 20 or more yards. His first score to Chase Brown and a touchdown to Drew Sample in the 3rd quarter. Should the Raiders trade away their big-name players before the deadline? Depends on how much job security general manager Tom Telesco feels he has Plus, what can he get in return for a full rebuild? The Raiders have lost 5 straight games for the first time since 2018, and the bye could not come at a better time. Owner Mark Davis has already said defensive end Max Crosby is untouchable. So what other trade chips might the Raiders have? Wide receiver Jacoby Myers, cornerback Nate Hobbs, left tackle Colton Miller. Las Vegas probably doesn't get anything more than a fourth-round pick for any of them, so they could potentially package the picks to move up. Describe the game in 2 words: painful day. Both Hobbs and Miller left the game in the second quarter with ankle injuries. So did Miller's replacement at left tackle, Andrus Peat, and left guard Cody Whitehair. Tight end Harrison Bryant sustained an ankle injury in the third quarter. That doesn't account for the painful play of quarterback Gardner Minshew, who lost another fumble and was benched in favor of Desmond Ridder late in the third quarter. Biggest hole in the game plan: defending the middle of the field. It's a copycat league, so a week after the Chiefs plundered the Raiders just beyond the line of scrimmage, the Bengals did the same a lot. Quarterback Joe Burrow sliced and diced there in the first half, completing 12 of 14 passes for 119 yards and a touchdown on throws between the numbers. It continued in the second half. How can the Falcons get by if Drake London misses time? The receiver came into Sunday's game tied for fourth in the league in receptions, 48, and tied for third in touchdown catches, 5. London caught another touchdown Sunday, but then he left the game with a hip injury and didn't return. London is also a key blocker on running plays, which makes the loss even tougher. Atlanta was already thin at wide receiver, so maybe the Falcons will look to make a trade before Tuesday's deadline if London is out for a bit. Describe the game in 2 words: sorely needed. The Falcons have been getting boastful in the NFC South, going 4-0 against their division with wins over the struggling Panthers and Saints. Against everyone else, Atlanta was 1-3. The Cowboys aren't elite, but this was a necessary, definitive victory for the Falcons, who have won 5 of their past 6 games. Most surprising performance: the Falcons' pass rush entered the game with a league-low 6 sacks. On Sunday, they had 3 against quarterback Dak Prescott, with Arnold Ebiketie, Grady Jarrett, and Caden Ellis all getting to him. Jarrett leads the team with 2.5 sacks. For Ebiketie and Ellis, it was the first time either of them had a sack this season. What should the Cowboys now do at the deadline? At 3-5, the Cowboys have as many losses as they had in each of the past 3 seasons. And they're not sure on the severity of Dak Prescott's hamstring injury, which forced him out of the game late in the third quarter. The Cowboys have plenty of needs: wide receiver, defensive line, offensive line, and running back. But there hasn't been an indication that owner and general manager Jerry Jones will go all in, like he said he would during the offseason. Would they trade one of their core players? Jones has consistently said he likes the roster, so that is probably a no. Eye-popping stat: in the first half, Prescott averaged 2.2 average air yards per target, the lowest rate in the first half of a game in his career, and the second lowest in any half of his career. Without any protection, even against a poor Falcons pass rush, the Cowboys had to get the ball out of Prescott's hands in a hurry. Not even that could prevent him from sustaining his injury. Describe the game in 2 words: all wrong. The Cowboys entered the game without Ezekiel Elliott, disciplinary reasons, Micah Parsons, ankle, and Darren Bland, foot. Then they lost Prescott. CeeDee Lamb appeared to injure his right shoulder too, though he caught a late TD after getting hurt. Perhaps Parsons and Bland play next week, but if Prescott is out for a prolonged period, this season is as doomed as 2015. That's when Tony Romo suffered 2 collarbone injuries, and the team finished 4-12. What does the Ravens' rout of the Broncos say about them? Baltimore is the hardest team in the NFL to predict. In winning 6 of their past 7 games, the Ravens have beaten 3 teams with winning records: the Bills, Commanders, and Broncos, by a combined score of 106-43. But this is the same Baltimore team that has lost to 2 last-place teams in the Raiders and Browns. It comes down to the much-criticized Ravens defense. When Baltimore holds teams to 25 or fewer points, the Ravens are 4-0. Describe the game in 2 words: perfect day. After missing 2 practices this week with back and knee injuries, Jackson recorded a perfect 158.3 passer rating by completing 16 of 19 passes for 280 yards and 3 touchdowns. This was Jackson's 4th career game with a perfect passer rating, which ties Ben Roethlisberger for the most by any player in NFL history. minimum 10 pass attempts, according to ESPN research. Most surprising performance, wide receiver Zay Flowers. He became the first Ravens player to total 100 yards receiving and 2 touchdown catches in the same game since Hollywood Brown in 2019. Flowers also is the first player this year to record 100 receiving yards against a Broncos defense that was ranked number 4 in pass defense before Sunday. Flowers has been on a tear with 4 100-yard receiving games in the past 5 weeks. Are the Broncos really not ready to fight up in weight class? The Broncos entered Sunday's game with a 3-game stretch at Baltimore, at Kansas City, and against Atlanta to show how ready they are to be in the playoff conversation. Consider the first test to be a robust F. Their early fourth down gambles didn't work, and the Broncos had no answer for quarterback Lamar Jackson's ability to find their weak spots. The Broncos offense found few big plays against a Ravens defense that had surrendered a long list before Sunday. They will have to threaten opposing defenses far more in the coming weeks, tackle exponentially better, and shorten the list of mistakes. Otherwise, the next 2 weeks will look similar to this week. Describe the game in 2 words: bad memories. The Broncos defense had done the heavy lifting to get the team to 5-3, but in a sea of missed tackles, they looked a little too much like the team's defense early in 2023. The Ravens found backup safety Devin Key in coverage over and over again. They kept Flowers away from Patterson too. The Broncos wanted to match up Certain with Flowers, at least in the red zone, and Jackson was never under much duress. Biggest hole in the game plan: the Broncos have not been a big play offense all season, but the Ravens had surrendered 46 explosive plays coming into this game, runs of at least 10 yards or pass plays of at least 20. The Broncos had a 33-yard completion to Cortland Sutton and a 34-yard completion to Javonte Williams on a scramble. But beyond that, it was more of the same: low-impact throws and missed opportunities. Can the offense sustain what it showed in the second half? The Jets had 3 consecutive touchdown drives of 70-plus yards, something they hadn't done in a single game since 2016. QB Aaron Rodgers caught fire after a terrible first half, his word, with WR's Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams making big plays. Yes, they can keep it going because their next 2 opponents, the Cardinals and Colts, were ranked 27th and 28th in yards allowed, respectively, at the start of Week 9. The Jets cleaned up some issues in their operation and finally resembled what they were expected to be. Now they have to hope their injury-plagued offensive line can get healthy. Eye-popping stat: 14%. That was the completion probability on Rodgers' third and 19 touchdown pass to Wilson from the Houston 26 per NFL Next Gen stats. Wilson made the play of the Jets season, a one-handed acrobatic catch in the back of the end zone. It could be a turning point for the Jets if they can work their way back into contention. Most surprising performance: edge rusher Haason Reddick. In his second game, he played a lot, and well, for someone who sat out 6 months of off-season workouts, training camp, and games because of a holdout. He played 42 of 75 snaps, recorded 8 quarterback pressures, and was on the field for 5 of the Jets' 8 sacks. There is no doubt that he adds some juice to the pass rush. Can the Texans snap out of their offensive funk? In the past 3 games, the Texans' offense has averaged only 19 points per game, contributing to a 1-2 record during that stretch. The pass blocking is at the root of their inability to score, as quarterback C.J. Stroud has been sacked 14 times since Week 7. If Houston can't fix this problem, a team that had Super Bowl aspirations will come up well short of that goal. Describe the game in 2 words: no protection. Stroud was sacked 8 times, and no quarterback can survive that type of barrage. If it continues, eventually Stroud's play will tail off, or at worst, he will suffer an injury that will sideline him. Eye-popping stat: cornerback Derek Stingley Jr. was targeted 8 times against the Jets, but allowed only 22 receiving yards and registered a pass deflection.
DNA testing site 23andMe fights for survival. 3 years ago, the DNA testing firm 23andMe was a massive success with a share price higher than Apple's. But from those heady days of millions of people rushing to send it saliva samples in return for detailed reports about their ancestry, family connections, and genetic makeup, it now finds itself fighting for its survival. Its share price has plummeted, and this week it narrowly avoided being delisted from the stock market. And of course, this is a company that holds the most sensitive data imaginable about its customers, raising troubling questions about what might happen to its huge and extremely valuable database of individual human DNA. When contacted by the BBC, 23andMe was bullish about its prospects and insistent it remained committed to protecting customer data and consistently focused on maintaining the privacy of our customers. But how did what was once one of the most talked about tech firms get to the position where it has to answer questions about its very survival? Not so long ago, 23andMe was in the public eye for all the right reasons. Its famous customers included Snoop Dogg, Oprah Winfrey, Eva Longoria, and Warren Buffett, and millions of users were getting unexpected and life-changing results. Some people discovered that their parents were not who they thought they were, or that they had a genetic predisposition to serious health conditions. Its share price rocketed to $321. Fast forward 3 years, and that price has slumped to just under $5, and the company is worth 2% of what it once was. What went wrong? According to Professor Dimitris Andriosopoulos, founder of the Responsible Business Unit at Strathclyde University, the problem for 23andMe was twofold. Firstly, it didn't really have a continuing business model. Once you'd paid for your DNA report, there was very little for you to return for. Secondly, plans to use an anonymized version of the gathered DNA database for drug research took too long to become profitable because the drug development process takes so many years. That leads him to a blunt conclusion. If I had a crystal ball, I'd say they will maybe last for a bit longer, he told the BBC. But as it currently is, in my view, 23andMe is highly unlikely to survive. The problems at 23andMe are reflected in the turmoil in its leadership. The board resigned in the summer, and only the CEO and co-founder, Anne Wojcicki, sister of the late YouTube boss Susan Wojcicki and ex-wife of Google co-founder Sergey Brin, remains from the original lineup. Rumors have swirled that the firm will shortly either fold or be sold, claims that it rejects. 23andMe's co-founder and CEO Anne Wojcicki has publicly shared she intends to take the company private and is not open to considering third-party takeover proposals, the company said in a statement. But that hasn't stopped the speculation, with rival firm Ancestry calling for U.S. competition regulators to get involved if 23andMe does end up for sale. Companies rising and falling is nothing new, especially in tech. But 23andMe is different. It's worrying because of the sensitivity of the data, says Carissa Valise, author of Privacy is Power. And that is not just for the individuals who have used the firm. If you gave your data to 23andMe, you also gave the genetic data of your parents, your siblings, your children, and even distant kin who did not consent to that, she told the BBC. David Stilwell, professor of computational social science at Cambridge Judge Business School, agrees the stakes are high. DNA data is different. If your bank account details are hacked, it will be disruptive, but you can get a new bank account, he explained. If your non-identical sibling has used it, they share 50% of your DNA, so their data can still be used to make health predictions about you. The company is adamant these kinds of concerns are without foundation. Any company that handles consumer information, including the type of data we collect, there are applicable data protections set out in law required to be followed as part of any future ownership change, it said in its statement. The 23andMe Terms of Service and Privacy Statement would remain in place unless and until customers are presented with and agree to new terms and statements. There are also legal protections which apply in the UK under its version of the Data Protection Law, GDPR, whether the firm goes bust or changes hands. Even so, all companies can be hacked, as 23andMe was 12 months ago. And Carissa Valise remains uneasy, and says ultimately a much robust approach is needed if we want to keep our most personal information safe. The terms and conditions of these companies are typically incredibly inclusive. When you give out your personal data to them, you allow them to do pretty much anything they want with it, she said. Until we ban the trade in personal data, we are not well protected enough.
How Japan's youngest CEO transformed Hello Kitty. Hello Kitty, arguably Japan's best-loved creation, is celebrating her 50th anniversary. But all has not always been well at Sanrio, the Japanese company behind the character. The business has been on a spectacular journey of financial peaks and valleys. Hello Kitty has been ranked the second highest grossing media franchise in the world behind Pokémon, and ahead of the likes of Mickey Mouse and Star Wars. Underscoring her global fame, Britain's King Charles wished her a happy birthday during the state visit to the UK by Japan's Emperor and Empress in June. In recent years, though, Sanrio had been struggling to make money, as interest in Hello Kitty waned. Two previous surges in Sanrio sales, in 1999 and 2014, were both driven by the character's popularity. But these jumps in demand for the firm's products were not sustainable, says Yasuki Yoshioka of investment company SMBC Nikko. In the past, its performance had many ups and downs, as if it was on a roller coaster ride, Mr. Yoshioka says. Then, in 2020, Tamakuni Tsuji inherited the role as Sanrio's boss. He is the grandson of the firm's founder, Shintaro Tsuji, and was just 31 at the time, making him the youngest chief executive of a listed Japanese company. His grandfather then became Sanrio's chairman. Under the younger Mr. Tsuji's leadership, Sanrio changed its marketing strategy of its stable of other characters. It is not about lowering Hello Kitty's popularity, but it is about boosting others' recognition, he says. This resulted in Hello Kitty losing the position of Sanrio's most popular character. According to a poll of customers, that spot is now held by Cinnamoroll, a blue-eyed white puppy with pink cheeks, long ears and a tail that looks like a cinnamon roll. Sanrio is also no longer just about cute characters. If Hello Kitty is Japan's ambassador of cute, then Angry Red Panda Aggressive Retsuko or Agretsuko channels the frustrations of an ordinary working woman. The character, which is popular among Gen Zers, first appeared in a cartoon series on Japan's TBS television before it became a global hit on Netflix. Another unconventional character is Gudetama, or Lazy Egg, who is living with depression and fires out cold one-liners that reflect dark realities of life. As well as diversifying its characters, Sanrio boosted its overseas marketing and is now tackling counterfeits more rigorously. We are now using artificial intelligence to detect fake products and to make removal requests, says Mr. Tsuji. For its marketing strategy, collaborations with major brands including Starbucks, Crocs, and the LA Dodgers baseball team have been key, he added. In addition to our own promotion, by collaborating with global brands, we are trying to have our characters in the market throughout the year without many breaks. In a society that puts so much emphasis on seniority, Mr. Tsuji's surname was crucial to his ability to make major changes at Sanrio. Almost a quarter of listed companies in Japan, like car makers Toyota and Suzuki and camera firm Canon, are managed by members of the family that founded them. The reason is cultural, according to Professor Hokuto Dazai of Nagoya University of Commerce and Business. In Japan, home to the world's oldest continuous monarchy, there is strong recognition of families and family businesses, he says. The master-servant relationship from the samurai period has transitioned into the relationship between founding families and their employees, and historically commoners never fought over the top job. It is also because Japan has a smaller pool of professional executives to choose from, says Professor Dazai. Firms tend to look for their next boss internally, including founding family members. Still, it would be a lie if I said there was no pushback from other managers and employees in the company, Mr. Tsuji says. He also says he clashed with his grandfather over how to run the company. But one day I realized that I was being arrogant, trying to convince someone 60 years senior, he says. After about a year, my grandfather told me to run the company as I see fit, that he will leave it up to me. The new boss's revamp of the business has been paying off so far. Within 2 years of the younger Tsuji becoming chief executive, Sanrio was profitable again, in what analyst Mr. Yoshioka calls a beautiful V-shaped recovery. Its share price has risen tenfold since 2020 and the company now has a stock market valuation of more than 1 trillion yen, $6.5 billion, £5 billion. Away from the boardroom and stock market, there was also an intriguing incident earlier this year. While Hello Kitty's true identity is relatively well known in Japan, some overseas fans were shocked by comments from a Sanrio executive in July. Speaking on U.S. television, Retail Business Development Director Jill Koch told viewers that Hello Kitty is not a cat and is in fact a British schoolgirl. Her comments sparked a flurry of social media posts, with fans expressing their shock and confusion about the revelation. Hello Kitty is Hello Kitty, and she can be whoever you want her to be. She can be your sister, your mother, it can be another you, Mr. Tsuji says. Pushed on whether he has any idea why his grandfather decided not to make her Japanese, Mr. Tsuji concludes, London is an amazing city and it was the envy of many Japanese girls, so that may be one of the reasons they decided that she's from London. It may not be the definitive answer her fans are looking for, but after all, Hello Kitty was created 14 years before the younger Tsuji was even born. Half a century since her creation, it is possible that the beloved character's origin story will continue to be shrouded in mystery for years to come.
Africans at the cutting edge of interior design. After more than a decade as a lawyer at high-powered banking firms like Goldman Sachs and Societe Generale, Nigerian-British K.L.P Ejikim left the corporate world to follow her passion for interior design. Her rug collection is inspired by Nigeria's diverse terrain, rolling hills, winding rivers, sprawling savannas and dense forests, and reminds me of the view from plains. So, when you interpret that into a rug or a carpet, it's symbolic, she said when I met her at her stall at the Decorex interior design show held in London last month. It's like, every minute, this is what we're actually every day stepping on. Made from jute, a durable and eco-friendly material, each rug integrates these natural elements. Jute is typically cultivated locally for its edible leaves, not for fiber. It comes from the same plant used for udu soup, a staple in southwestern Nigeria. To bring her vision to life, Ejikim has her rugs produced in India and Nepal, where jute is more widely developed into a thriving industry. Also at the event was Amici Mandi, a Cameroonian-Nigerian interior designer who won House and Garden magazine's Rising Star Award in 2022. He was not showcasing any of his work but had just spoken in a side session about his transition from fashion to interior design. Mandi holds a degree in furniture and product design, but after working in the fashion industry and later at a design firm, he became increasingly dissatisfied with the lack of genuine African-inspired interior textiles. Too often, he found, they relied on cliched, post-colonial motifs. This led him to explore his Cameroonian and Nigerian heritage, with a focus on pre-colonial traditions. Recognizing the untapped potential of indigenous textiles fading from memory, especially with the rise of Ankara wax prints, a European import that has come to symbolize African design, Mandi set out to revive these cultural elements. He began integrating traditional techniques and patterns into his designs, and his work now includes a popular collection of cushions and throws, as well as a successful wallpaper collaboration. People have told me, "Oh, your work is not African," because they want to see Ankara prints. It's been so impressed in the mines, Mandi told me. I get inspiration from indigenous traditions and cultures, and then, I give it a more contemporary spin, he added. Listening to Mandi made me realize how much I, too, had come to associate modern African design with Ankara fabrics. This textile has dominated African fashion and design, making its mark on global stages in recent decades. And so, as I wandered through the exhibition, it was easy to assume that African designs were absent from this notable gathering. When she first started, Ejikim juggled both law and interior design, working in one during the week and the other on weekends. It did not take long for her to realize where her true passion lay. In one world, you're trying to contain your energy or yourself or your expression just so that you don't ruffle feathers, while in another world your energy, you can't even extinguish it, she said. Since making the leap to full-time design 6 years ago, she has tackled a variety of projects, from homes and workplaces to movie sets. Last year, she launched her own rug collection, adding a new dimension to her work from her Swallow and Tea studio. It's a really new thing and I've only had 2 shows, but so far I've had mostly residential and retail buyers, mainly from Europe, probably because my first show was in Belgium. Decorex was my first UK show, Edukim said. Most of Mandy's customers are Europeans, a trend he attributes to a prevailing preference among many Africans for foreign products. Most Africans still prefer to buy a Gucci, he said. I do have a few Africans buying, but they are not like everyday Africans. They were all people who were born and bred abroad and are deep into African heritage and culture. Both Edukim and Mandy concur that interior design in Africa is still in its developmental stages. In contrast to fashion, which has long been a significant focus for Africans and has recently experienced remarkable growth, the field of African interior design is just starting to establish itself. Edukim reflected on her first independent project in 2013, which coincided with a new wave of Africans in London entering high-paying fields like investment banking. She aimed to create spaces that not only exuded luxury and comfort but also captured a sense of home for her African clients, reflecting their heritage in a meaningful way. I was stumped because I'm somebody who loves antiques. I love old design. When I was in design school in London, my favorite thing was history of design, like learning about all the different periods, Victorian, Edwardian, etc., and what distinguished one from the other. But there was no such thing in Africa. There's nothing like the history of African design because we haven't really kept that track, she said. This realization motivated her to begin categorizing African design periods to better understand and preserve the continent's design evolution, an ongoing project she began during her past 10 years living in Nigeria before returning to London last year. Edukim visited places like the Bogabiri Art Gallery in Lagos, which displayed a mixture of old sculpture and modern art. She also visited cellars in quiet corners of Nigerian markets, where she came across staffs of office used by Igbo elders in pre-colonial times. She began categorizing these objects she came across according to their period in history, whether late 1990s or pre-colonial. She has not yet finished and wants to devote more time to it to use them in her interior design projects. Mandy believes that following trends in how we design our homes and other spaces was historically never an African thing, especially with the centuries of the transatlantic slave trade. Traditionally, interiors have never been a priority. We have always been into functionality. We were more into decorating our exteriors, like painting the walls, painting the outside, he said. Each civilization has evolved, but we didn't have the chance to evolve because of the 400 years we were arrested with the transatlantic slave trade. He added that Africans were in constant flight during the slave trade, so how can you think, I have this house, I have to make the inside fine, let me put that bench, let me weave this cloth. Our society didn't have the chance to evolve like that. Both Edukim and Mandy noted that many wealthy and prominent Africans, from celebrities to entrepreneurs, often have interiors that lack a distinctly African identity. However, Edukim believes this is changing as more Africans gain disposable income. They are increasingly investing in decorating their homes in a way that tells their personal story and captures their experiences. If you have a product that can be made beautiful and exquisite and sort of memorable, that tells some kind of story or has some kind of meaning, it will appeal to Africans and other people that are not African, she says. Adeyebi Trishan-Wabani is a Nigerian journalist and novelist based in Abuja and London.
The lightsaber-wielding photographer creating colorful light paintings. If you have ever written your name in the air with a sparkler on bonfire night, then you have experimented with light painting. Baffled by the lines of light floating in mid-air, Scottish photographer David Gilliver knew he had to try capturing them with his camera. I thought it was like sorcery, it's like magic, he says. For 15 years, Mr. Gilliver has been a pioneer in the technique of light painting. Now, one of his pictures, which he has called Where Rainbows Sleep, has been shortlisted for this year's British Photography Awards in its newest category, Best Low Light Photograph. Picture this: Mr. Gilliver is stood in a pitch-black fishing boat hut, dressed head to toe in dark clothing, holding a lightsaber. No, he's not reenacting Star Wars, this is just how the process of making the photo begins. To blend into the low-light background, Mr. Gilliver must imitate one of film's greatest villains. He channels his inner Darth Vader, but instead of the Force he uses a long-exposure photography technique, keeping the shutter open for anything from 30 seconds to 20 minutes. His camera, which he controls remotely, is at the other end of the room securely fixed to a tripod, because even the slightest movement will cause a blurring of the image. Mr. Gilliver moves towards the camera, swishing his lightsaber before disappearing down the trap door. The exposure length gives him enough time to fire a flash gun manually to illuminate the boat hut surroundings. Simple is often best, Mr. Gilliver says, when it comes to creating his waves of light. But he also loves to experiment. In another photo, he uses butterfly keyrings with battery-operated lights to create an image of multiple floating butterflies. He also created an eerie orb sitting within the ancient Callanish stones on the Isle of Lewis, by swinging a light on the end of a string like a lasso during the long exposure time. The 45-year-old Glasgow School of Art graduate has always had an artistic eye. However, making a living as an artist initially proved difficult, and he ended up working in finance in the Channel Islands for 14 years. He became utterly obsessed with light painting to capture the magical landscapes of Guernsey at night. When he moved back to Scotland in 2015, he says the dramatic and iconic backdrops of the country kept his creativity alive. In 2018, he abandoned his 9-to-5 life to finally take up photography full-time. Advertisement. When he started posting his light paintings online, he says most people would ask him how he did it. Photographers would ask to come with him while he created his images, he says. Mr. Gilliver, who lives in Gartcosh, North Lanarkshire, now teaches his own workshops across the UK. He says most people think the technique is hard to understand, but actually it is very accessible once people start to experiment and play with light. He says teaching found him and he enjoys people's natural curiosity. Watching their eyes light up as they begin to learn what the creative possibilities are of this amazing art form is one of the many joys of teaching, he says. Along with light painting, Mr. Gilliver has a large portfolio of macro photography. The technique is a form of extreme close-up photography and can be used to capture small objects, flowers, and insects. Mr. Gilliver plays around with imaginative scenarios using small figurines. His photos range from iconic film scenes to handling more serious topics.